the adventure in this case is a book by Giorgio Agamben, all about how to make the most of your life, how to live a rich life, a creative life, a life that takes risks, a life that agrees with all the things that I've been talking about in this channel since day one. Now, Agamben is a philosopher, not a poet, but I still very much enjoyed this book. This book has 5 chapters, each covering a different kind of astrological sign or god, and there's 5 signs or stars in this constellation. He has a chapter on daimon, the guiding force in one's life, adventure or taike, which is another way to say your fame, fortune, and glory, eros, love, Ananke, which is the god of necessity, but in Agamben's world is also kind of about how events unfold and how we deal with difficult circumstances. And his last chapter, Elpis, is on hope, the shortest chapter, of course. So why do I have this Tolkien quote up? Well, we're talking about adventure, and we're talking about taking these risks. And I have to concede, doing these things doesn't always make you popular or respectable. These risks can outweigh the potential benefits. And if you're the type of person who calculates these types of things a lot and has to wonder whether it's worth it, I'm going to go ahead and say adventure isn't the right thing for you. Furthermore, this video isn't the right thing for you. So go ahead and hit the stop, find something else to do. Pull the ripcord. Now, because this is an adventure, I am not going to follow this book exactly linearly. We're going to go a little bit out of order. But just to get things started, we're going to start where Agamben starts, which is in a very, very strange place. He's starting with a book by Goethe called Elective Affinities, first published in 1809. Except he doesn't really start with the book by Goethe. He kind of starts with this essay about the book by Walter Benjamin, who wrote an essay on Goethe's novel Elective Affinities about 100 years after the novel, so the early 20th century. And Benjamin, who is a critic and philosopher and kind of a public intellectual of his era, is very interested, among other things, in whether we could describe the activity of artists, writers, and poets as myth-making or mythic. Is Goethe's life kind of in itself a myth? And if so, in what way? And we'll circle back to that, but I want you to keep an eye and an ear out for this idea of what exactly constitutes creative life and how can we best describe and approach it. Okay. Agamben, from there, most of his focus when he's trying to frame up what an adventure really is in his second chapter, he's going to be looking at Arthurian legends in particular. And he wants to go there because that really is this time where the concept of adventure is first really introduced to Romance languages. So he's going to look at this poem from Chrétien de Troyes, this a vain poem. And we can look at this part right now where the hero introduces himself to a gentleman. And I'll just read it for us. I am, he said, a knight seeking, and he uses this word trouver in the French, what I cannot find. Long have I sought, and nothing have I found. And what is it what is this thou fain wouldest find, trouver? Some adventure whereby to test my prowess and bravery? Now I beg and urgently request thee to give me some counsel, if possible, concerning some adventure or marvelous thing. Says he, though only you can do it, for I know nothing of adventure, nor did I ever hear tell of such. I will start. Agamben is pointing us towards this trover verb, which gives us the root of troubadour, and troubadour, of course, were these traveling poets of the Middle Ages who helped develop what we would now consider to be lyric poetry in contemporary practice. So that they're this important model for what it means to write about love, write about what's most important to you, and they're also models for how to live a creative life and pursue an authentic creative existence, right? He's also interested in the fact that this knight wants to prove himself. It's not enough just to find a good time somewhere. Hey, do you know some place where, a guy can find some fun? And it's also not enough just to find some random unsuspecting goblin and beat the snot out of him. It's got to be a proper test. And that's also going to be something we circle back to. Now, what's interesting is this old man not only doesn't know where you can find this type of thing, but has never really heard of it. And what's significant for Agamben here is that the hearing of, speaking of, and engaging in become commingled in this way. The old man hasn't been on an adventure, therefore hasn't been able to tell an adventure, and therefore hasn't necessarily heard of an adventure. Now, you would think you could hear of something and not do it, but certainly in this particular instance, that's not possible, and the hearing of and the doing are intertwined. We'll move on here to this Parsifal legend written by Wolfram von Eichenbach, or Eichenbach, in the 13th century. And I'm not going to bother with the German, just as I didn't bother with the French, but here we have the translation via this book. The woman slumbered, yet weapons of love she bore, a mouth so red and glowing, that the knight's heart had wounded sore. And as she slept, they parted asunder, her lips so bright that the fire of love had kindled. There lay the woman Adventure. Now, again, what's interesting is Agamben points us to the fact that poetry before, like a Greek epic, Homer's epics, would have an invocation of the muse to begin, which would then inspire the poet to tell the story. But this isn't happening at the beginning. This is happening somewhere in the middle of the poem. Point A and point B, this woman who's sleeping does not inspire the poet to write. She literally embodies the poem itself. She is indistinguishable from the poem. She is the object of the adventure, and she is the adventure as it's being told. And these are all intertwined in this way. So that's another really important thing that he wants to point us to, how adventure is the we can't separate out these different things. We can't separate out who's talking, who's experiencing, who's being experienced. They all kind of meld together. This leads us naturally with this total babe lying in the woods and this knight who wants to get with her, leads us naturally to Eros here. And so obviously when we're talking about Eros in the Agamben cinematic universe, we're talking about the kind of fun that can ensue when a group of adventurers all get together to explore a dungeon together. And yeah, for his chapter on Eros, there's a lot of theory you need to digest first before you can roll a charisma check, so we need to get into that, okay? Agamben starts with a theory of adventure, probably because he's a philosopher. He's going to start with theory, and he's going to look at this Hegel's theory, Hegelian theory, you could say. Now, Hegel is skeptical of adventure. And Hegel is a very important figure in philosophy and in German idealism. He has this big influence on 19th century philosophy, so you could say Agamben feels obligated to confront this skepticism of adventure. We also say Hegel is interested in dialectics, which means, in his case, kind of to simplify things down, one thing is informed by its opposite. And we'll return to this dialectics problem later, but Hegel uses his method, his dialectic method, to criticize medieval literature and adventure in particular as creating these externalities that exist independent of reality. So like they're kind of just like things that happen in your imagination that don't happen in real life, right? We would call that kind of sci-fi or fantasy today, or escapism, or even, I suppose you could say, fan service. It's difficult to determine then, if we say, well, adventures are these fantasies, how Agamben can situate this adventure as this is an important model for creative activity. So he explores from Hegel, he explores this guy, George Simmel, who was a founder of the Frankfurt School of Philosophy, and asks this question about adventure. Okay, well, let's say they are this fantasy, right? But how do we differentiate between two similar experiences in life, one of which we call an adventure? Because colloquially, we could say, oh yeah, traffic was a fucking adventure today, right? And following Hegel, Simmel feels adventure is this dropping out of the continuity of life, in his essay Das Aventur in 1911. Again, this dropping out of the continuity of life then echoes Hegel, that it's this kind of this separate realm, this fantasy realm. And this is adding up, this kind of barrier for Agamben's thesis that we're going to learn how to live more meaningfully and more authentically through adventure, right? These two philosophers are really pushing against this. And Hegel's obviously huge in philosophy, but Simmel is no slouch either. I'm just going to put on this recent decades have seen George Simmel's canonical status in American sociology solidify and his impact on research expand. So still to this day, Simmel is studied and evaluated and taken very seriously. And Simmel, as Agamben explores, then connects, here's where we finally get to Eros, connects adventure with Eros, saying, our linguistic custom hardly lets us understand by adventure anything but an erotic one. So he's saying adventure always has this kind of erotic dimension. I'm not so sure I agree, but you could say, yeah, she's a little adventurous in the sack, right? So, and this to Agamben takes him to this place of adventure always has this notion of when you meet the damsel, are you going to win her by conquest or by grace? Is it going to be something where you win a fair fight, or is it going to be kind of just luck and happenstance? And these two things to Agamben are kind of contradictory. It seems like you can't have them both. And in this Italian way, he says they're neatly opposed in man. In other words, conquest and grace are opposite factors in man, but they're closely linked in woman. And I think it's a little bit difficult to understand exactly what he means. It might be some Italian idea here, but we'll just move on. We want to note here that Agamben really wants to redeem adventure and rescue it from this philosophical backwater where it's currently residing. How is he going to do that? So his answer is going to be Heidegger, and we'll get much more into Heidegger in a moment. I'm sorry that we're going on these diversions, but it's all part of the adventure, right? So we're going down this into this deeper and deeper into this dungeon, right? And in this chapter, what he's going to use, he's going to leverage the student of Heidegger, this guy Oskar Becker, and what Oskar Becker is noticing is that in some adventures, the artist can take place of the knight, and then the adventure becomes this artistic expression. And he feels this is the model for romanticism, and hence this tendency towards irony. Okay, Becker writes, and we'll put it right here, completion of his work is instantaneous and eternal, meaning you can write the poem and it's done, and then it lasts forever. He is both things at the same time and knows he is this irreconcilability. Along with it, he knows he is an essential, a pure phenomenon, a metaphysical adventurer unveiled as such. In other words, in the poem or of the romantic, there's a self-consciousness that the poet is present and written into the poem. His being is at the same time semblance and truth. He is irony. Okay, so that's a complicated and idea to pick apart, but we could say, and Agamben would say this, that we end up with totally different types of people. The knight, who is completely unironic and would never conceive of adventure as an aestheticization of existence, and this kind of more effete, ironical poet figure of romanticism. Now, why am I going down all this stuff? Why are we here? How the heck do we get here? How do we get out of this dungeon? How do we get out of way deep down in the darkness? Well, all this is leading back to Goethe, right? And we're leading back to Goethe because Goethe is this creature of German romanticism. He embodies both these forces of romantic thought and classical thought, and represents this turning point in continental literature, and in Northern European literature in particular. But before we go back to Goethe, we have to discuss Dante, okay? We have to discuss Dante because Dante is another refusenik of the adventure model. Dante wanted the Inferno and its sequels to be mythic, to be a hero's journey, but he didn't want it to be an adventure because he didn't like the connotation from these Arthurian legends and these other heroic stories about all this diversion that happens, all this kind of strange stuff that is not orderly, and it's not a linear progression that he wanted, where the hero would gradually level up, gradually improve, and gradually get to heaven. Adventure doesn't work that way. Adventure works in these kind of circles. It works in these nonlinear patterns that are that you can get lost in. So bear that in mind, that Dante is an objector to the adventure model, and he's a big hero to the channel. I often say the journey of poetry, which is the journey is the word, the poet's journey, that Dante approved of. So we're talking about something that isn't exactly a journey. We're talking about something a little bit with a slightly different character, okay? Now we're going to go back. We're going to go back to book one here and go back to Daimon. And we're going to put up the Socrates quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And we're going to go back to Daimon because we're going to go back to Goethe again, okay? We'll get there. I promise you we'll get there. I don't know if you want to get to Goethe, but we're going to get to Goethe, okay? A funny story about Goethe, very quickly. My wife studied in Germany very briefly. She went to the Goethe Institute, and there was a guy from, I don't know where he was from, let's say it's from Kentucky, And he couldn't say Goethe, so he would call it the Goethe Institute. So I will avoid saying Goethe for Goethe, but Goethe, the Goethe Institute. Here we go. So again, once again, just to reiterate, Agamben is really interested in what it means to be a creative person, or at least how to live a life creatively. That's why he's interested in unpacking this adventure stuff. And he's interested in how do people balance forces that seem automatic or compulsory, that make you do stuff. Like I just have to write a poem, or I just have to go for a walk, or I just can't stand that person. I need to do something else. Or I need to have an adventure. I need to challenge myself. I need to go and do something in the world, okay? And these automatic forces appear to compel us to do impulsive, unpredictable things, okay? Like the night. I need to find this thing. I've been searching. I need to find it. Well, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about, dude. You sound crazy. This question also interested Walter Benjamin, this critic who Agamben clearly admires. And you could say that a lot of this book, to me, seems like reads a little bit like a tribute to Benjamin. And Benjamin's essay on elective affinities, also called Elective Affinities, is messy. It's a big 60-page, dense brick of stuff. And this book is much more tidy and neat. So you could say to a certain extent, it's kind of a way to make the bed of Walter Benjamin's philosophy and present it in this tidy manner. Okay? So that Goethe has been interpreted by this guy after his death, Friedrich Gundolf, who comes before Walter Benjamin and is writing a lot about Goethe and his life. And Benjamin wants to disagree with Gundolf and feels he misunderstands the role of myth and art. Okay, so now let's look at this. Okay, and this is from Benjamin's essay. In the heroic life, typology and representation culminate in the concept of task, right? So right here where we need to be in the adventure. The presence of this task and its evident symbolism distinguishes the superhuman from human life. It characterizes Orpheus, the 12 tasks, okay? We're right where we need to be, okay? One of the most powerful sources of this symbolism flows from the astral myth, the superhuman type of the Redeemer. The hero represents mankind through his work on the starry sky. Okay, so now we're into astrology. The primal words of the Orphic poem apply to him. It is his daemon, the sun-like one, his Tyche, the one that is changeable as the moon, his fate ineluctable like the astral Ananke. You see, we're getting all of Agamben's system laid out here. Even Eros does not point beyond them. Only Elpis does. There we go. All 5 stars of the system. And so it is no accident that the author, Gundolf, came across Elpis when he sought something close to the human in other primal words. No accident that, among them all, Elpis alone was found to need no explanation. Yet no accident, too, that not Elpis, but rather the rigid canon of the other 4 furnished the scheme for Gundolf's Goethe. Accordingly, the question of method that is posed, blah, 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 blah. Okay. We're not going to take apart every single bit of this essay by Benjamin, nor are we going to analyze the ways in which specifically he disagrees with Gundolf. What's important here for us to recognize is this astrology is not something that Agamben invented, and the use of this astrology in studying literature and understanding adventure and the hero's journey is also not something that Agamben invented. He's reiterating, he's going back over existing materials and trying to present it in a new manner. Why Goethe is at the center of this struggle is something that somewhat puzzles me, but ultimately with whom we begin is not the most important thing. All of this leads back to the opening of Agamben's book, where he pulls out this seemingly random passage from Macrobius, a Latin writer from late antiquity, who Goethe purportedly read. And we're going to read this passage from Macrobius together, which again is going to echo what Benjamin has already been discussing. The Egyptians believe 4 gods attend a human being as it is born: demon, chance, love, and necessity. The first 2 they mean to be regarded as the sun and moon, because the sun is the source of spirit, warmth, and light, is the begetter and guardian of human life, and so is believed to be the daemon, or deity, of the one being born. All right. So now we're really getting somewhere, because we're going back to this classical source that informs Goethe, that inspires Benjamin, and occasions the writing of this new book by Agamben. Okay? And what's interesting to hear is that this is going to be about the daemon, the demon, this guiding star that we're all supposedly born under, that dictates your personality, that dictates what creative life force you have. If you're overcome by the daemon, you could be very productive in your creative affairs. And for Goethe, this daemon became the thing that he devoted his entire project to. Okay, he wrote under the daemon's star, and wanted to dedicate his life to that, in his own words, in his autobiography. Okay. Now, what's also interesting here is when Goethe writes this about the daemon, he's echoing Plato, whose apology of Socrates shows the philosopher invoking this daemon to defend himself from accusations of atheism, and to argue he always tries to do right and avoid wrong by following his daemon. Okay, and I'll put this up here. We're not going to read this in detail, but again, this is Socrates, according to Plato, defending himself from accusations of essentially being an atheist and having no morals and corrupting the youth. He's saying, no, that's not true. If you stay with me and we taught this over, you'll see that I always have followed this thing that comes from the oracles, and I always follow this daemon. I would never oppose the order and the rightness that descends from the gods to the oracles, to the daemon, to me. And I'm obedient to the gods. I'm a good Greek citizen. You can trust in that. Okay. While Agamben in this book suggests that Goethe is attempting to merge astrology and science and try to rationalize this whole messy problem of inspiration, I think it's curious, and Agamben surely knows that Goethe is echoing Plato so directly. I do think it's hard not to feel that Agamben is pointing us in this very particular direction, in this kind of direct line almost that leads all the way back to the origins of philosophy and this central problem. Because Goethe, when he's mimicking Socrates, is also, in a sense, advancing a claim about how he lived his life and pursued his writing. Like so many of us creative people say you're wasting your time, right? What you do is pointless, or even in some cases immoral. That it's corrupting people, or at the very least not helping anyone. And Goethe is saying, not only was I not corrupting someone or wasting my time, not corrupting anyone, in the same way Socrates was a critic of the society that he lived in and able to inform and advance the morality and kind of underpinnings of what a moral society should be, so too can my writing. Okay? Now, let's advance after a short pause. Event. We're going to talk about this chapter on event. I think this chapter is really about Stoicism and how Agamben wants to criticize it. So for all you bros out there who carry around Marcus Aurelius' Meditations in your Joe Rogan fanny pack, this bud's for you. But before we talk about Agamben's beef with the Stoics, let's ask us what the heck that has to do with Ananke, the god of necessity. And a warning here, this chapter of the book gets really into the weeds of philosophy. But I believe philosophy, like poetry, is for everyone. So we are gonna go for it. All right? Let's do this. It's part of the adventure. Well, necessity can be understood as whatever we can't avoid. The shit that happens to us, whether we like it or not. And taike, or fate, has some element of randomness. And necessity represents that inevitable outcome, okay? A goddess who embodies and inflicts that which cannot be avoided. Now, Agamben tends to talk about taike when talking about necessity, okay? Which makes for a confusing chapter, I agree. And it's safe to say, I think, that he feels necessity is this aspect of fate. So if for him, taike represents adventure, necessity represents individual events or challenges within the adventure. Now, I'm reading between the lines here, but that's as close as I can figure. Now, Agamben, once again, is going to go back to Plato here, okay? And he's going to describe this world of ideals that Plato proposes, or pure forms called eidos, that could never be embodied in our sensations, happenings, or experiences directly. We could know of them, but anytime they were particularized, they lost their meaning. For Stoics, this is super important, okay? This is super, super big. Because if you're the Joe Rogan type, it means that anything that happens to you isn't actually a form of eidos. And we have the power to decide how we react to it as long as we stay rational and remember whatever we feel or sense isn't the same as a rational and permanent truth. Yeah, bro. So eidos and taike are opposed to one another. In other words, eidos are beyond the subjective and exist independent of us, while Agamben, following his fellow Italian philosopher Carlo Diano, says taike is always inscribed into a relation, or when he quotes him directly, he says it's a hypostatization of the event. So just how, in the same way that forms or eidos can't be coerced into an event, similarly, these events cannot be coerced into a form. There's no way to put that genie back in a bottle, okay? That would be taking something that's inherently not an abstraction and trying to kind of boil it off and essentialize it. It's never going to work, okay? So if an event can't be an abstraction, what does that mean exactly? Okay, why is Agamben so concerned with this? Well, he's saying events always have to happen to somebody and thus can never be understood in relation in this pure abstract way. Someone is either talking about the event or they're experiencing the event, or as they're experiencing it, I suppose they're kind of speaking to themselves, right? They're forming this sentence cognitively, forming these different abstract tokens of words into a sentence in their head to explain what's going on. And without that self-explanation, you can't say the event even exists, okay? That's a pretty fancy way of saying subjective, but it's a very specific way of saying it as well. Again, to reiterate, this adventure is something that involves a person for whom the adventure occurs. That's why it's an adventure, not just a venture. Okay? Because the adventurer becomes embodied in the adventure, the two cannot be meaningfully separated. And it's all about this narrative aspect, this use of language, and this self-aware use of language. Now, as he goes into this self-awareness issue, he's going to grab the toolbox of Martin Heidegger to go further and go deeper. And Agamben really knows Heidegger's system extremely well because he personally participated in Heidegger's seminars at a retreat center in France when he was a young scholar. So to address this elephant in the room, Heidegger was once a member of the Nazi Party and was an apologist for it. After the war, he made, in my opinion, insufficient amends for his go-along, get-along attitude. But he was not meaningfully punished at Nuremberg and received basically a slap on the wrist. That doesn't mean that all Heidegger's ideas are invalid or bad, or that Agamben was a bad person for studying with him. But Heidegger himself did use his philosophical system to justify Nazism while Hitler was in power. And I believe that ought to color, and indeed does color, how his ideas are received today. Personally, I prefer a philosophy that isn't so easily twisted, but I suppose that's easy enough for me to say sitting here in a room in Vermont when there's none of those types of pressures around me. Now, what are we talking about before this digression? Okay? Oh, yeah. We were talking about these types of external pressures. We were talking about how often we experience life as totally arbitrary and dictated by forces outside of our control. Right on topic here, okay? So to address this, Agamben is keen on Heidegger's concept of Dasein, which is often translated as being in the world, so just like existifying. And it's his way of solving what he felt was a core problem in Western philosophy, this assumption that we can neutrally observe the world as if external agents to it. Instead, Heidegger believes the world and our existence in it are inseparable, and there's no way to divide what is observed from what is observing. Heidegger's way of phrasing this is when he defines Dasein, he says it is, quote, that entity which in its being has this very being as an issue. So in other words, human existence, unlike all other forms of existence, like plant existence or dirt existence or the existence of a tea kettle, human existence is typified by this self-awareness that it has an issue with its own existence. So in Heidegger's crazy world, Dasein is defined as having a problem with itself. Okay? Now another way to phrase that is he's saying that introspection and asking questions about our existence is baked into the work of actually meaningfully existing as a human being. You can't meaningfully exist as a human unless you're willing to do the work of introspection. All right, let's try a different tack, okay? Let's imagine you're cold chilling in Heideggerville, and you go out for a walk downtown, you see that 99% of people are just kind of farting around, shopping, shoving burgers in their face, talking about the big game, not really living, but not quite dead either. But some, very few, are in this cafe discussing philosophy, quaffing high-grade espresso, and sprinkling the conversation with German terminology. These folks recognize they have this Dasein as part of them. Their awareness is what Heidegger calls existentiality. And its core concern is realizing who you really are and being that thing and only that thing. Or more simply, for those select few who seek to live authentically, the few, the proud, the totally insane, they will need to attune themselves to this kind of being within a being, the entity that is Dasein. If that reminds you of the daemon, that's good. Very good. I'm sure it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly the same, but we're damn sure knocking on the same door now. If you want to actualize yourself, you need to pay attention to this thing. Call it Dasein, or call it daemon, or call it demon, or call it inner child. Call it whatever the fuck you want. Agamben is pointing us towards this heart and soul of an ancient philosophical problem that goes back to Socrates' trial, which is, how do you test for authenticity? Now, you could be mad here and say, geez, dude, we're supposed to be talking about necessity, about ananke, and it's just been digression after digression. We've talked about Tyche, we've talked about Socrates and his daimon, but we haven't really talked about ananke. But this is this astrology, remember, where one force influences another. Okay, so they're interrelated forces. They're part of this dialectic where one star clarifies the other. Heidegger plays such a big role in this chapter because he says it's not possible to understand most phenomena until you understand Dasein, because you are going to be blinded by your false objectivity. And then for Agamben, Dasein is this only path through the forest of necessity. Now, returning to Stoicism, you could say Agamben believes Stoicism is an insufficient reaction to necessity because it assumes you could be objective, that you could separate yourself from these circumstances and observe them neutrally. That when things are going bad, when something bad happens in your life, you're going to be able to kind of say, well, that happened, that's true, and that's an event in the world, but it's not a permanent truth. It's not a part of the world of forms. And since I can separate myself from these variable and happenings that come and go and really have nothing to do with my soul or my essence, I can be objective about it, and I can essentially maintain this poker face even though, I lost my job, or, I'm going through a divorce, or a loved one died. All these things, ultimately, I can get through. And Agamben is saying that's probably not accurate, point A, and probably certainly not going to be a way to live an authentic, creative life. Okay? Now, there was another philosopher then that Agamben has to deal with who also recognized the limitations of Stoicism, although he admired Stoicism, and that was Nietzsche. So what Nietzsche found was he actually felt if you're able to put up with it, if you're able to tolerate the adversity in your life and overcome it, then it can't really have been that difficult, right? It couldn't have been that bad. So Nietzsche has this thought problem for philosophers and for people who are interested in special people, basically. Again, Nietzsche, like Heidegger, doesn't write philosophy for ordinary people. He only writes it for people who want to be elite. Nietzsche is interested in people who want to become supermen. And he says if you're interested in becoming a superman, this philosophy of Stoicism will hold you back. And instead, what you should do is you should imagine the worst possible thing that could happen to you. Mentally imagine it right now. Is it, the death of your spouse? Is it losing all your money? Is it being stranded in the wilderness because you're terrified of wild animals? Whatever that is, imagine it right now. He called this amor fati, and wish for the worst thing that could happen to happen. And he says this would actually be, in the long term, a positive for you, and that he wishes his friends to experience this thing. Because if they experience this thing, they have the opportunity to be completely destroyed, to be totally wrecked by it, and then rise over it and become supermen. to fully experience all of that pain, not to remove themselves, but to kind of drive through the shit, right? That's Nietzsche's program. Now, what Agamben says is both the Stoics and Nietzsche are incorrect. They're both wrong because both of them seek to paint these circumstances as things that happen to you and then you react to them. And he says Dasein and Heidegger provide this other model via adventure, that you are inseparable from the things that happen to you in your life, that you're part of them deeply and holistically, and that when you narrate and when you use language to make a story about it, or a poem, or a piece of art, that you are fully participating in your life for good or bad, whatever happens in the adventure, however many digressions, that you are a full partner in it. And that is his program for living authentically. Let's go on to the final chapter of his book on his chapter on hope. Okay? So he's going to summarize his thesis here that adventure, aka chance, aka taike, aka adventure, aka the meaning of life, the universe and everything, the most important thing out there is this adventure, wears 4 masks: Daimon, Eros, Ananke, and Elpis. Okay? And his takeaway here, the great advice from Giorgio is follow your daemon best you can. So do your best here. Don't blindly abandon yourself to him. Don't go Goethe. Put yourself into it. Do your best. But if you abandon yourself blindly and you hope that this is just going to work out for you, you're a fool. Because the demon is elusive. And as you, just when you need it most, it could vanish and go away. And the better approach, according to Agamben, is, quote, that to view poetry and happiness are not the gifts, his gifts. Rather, the demon himself is the ultimate gift that happiness and poetry award us at the point where they regenerate and give us new birth. In other words, what he's saying is that you can't say, I'm going to follow the demon and it's going to lead me to these things that I want. And he's saying that's backwards. These things that you want, should you be able to achieve them, should they happen, could be a way to lead you to an authentic relationship with yourself. They could be part of this path to return you to yourself, to return you to the demon, and essentially give yourself a second opportunity in life. The creative people who have a good relationship with the demon, they can live 2 lives, their ordinary life and this creative life. So this is kind of born-again theme here. Again, he describes the daemon as this source of potency or demigod, which is, again, following how Socrates defends himself against charges of atheism. Okay, so as you can see, Socrates is saying, hey, you say I'm an atheist and I'm godless, because I don't worship the gods, but in fact, I take these demigods, these demons, extremely seriously, and I understand that I must follow them. I must obey and do my best by these demons, and therefore, because I do that, per force, logically, I must believe in gods, because there's no such thing as a demigod without a god, and therefore, I must not be an atheist. It doesn't ultimately convince his jury. But this idea that these demigods within inside us are sources of potency, that the daimon is a source of potency, is integral. And Agamben says when this potency is failing you, when it's not working, this is Eros is probably your best resource here. And Eros is one of the forces, one of these stars that's much more powerful than Daimon, because it can physically carry you. It can transport you completely And it can actually overwhelm adventure itself. It's more powerful than even that. However, it's not going to last. So even if you satisfy an erotic or sexual desire, as soon as it's satisfied, you're kind of dumped back down to wherever you were before. Agamben says, in fulfillment, lovers lose their secret, which sounds like this weird Italian mumbo jumbo. But you could say he's simply saying you can't stay infatuated forever. Either satisfaction or reality intervenes, and therefore love is never something that can be truly possessed. Because of this complicated relationship we all have with Eros, he feels it's analogous to our relationship to hope, okay? Because hope is also something that you can never truly possess. When Pandora's box is opened and all the evils of the world are unleashed, hope Elpis is the one thing that stays in the box and doesn't come out. Now you could say that, oh, well, that's sad, so hope is the one thing we don't get. But his interpretation, Agamben's interpretation of that is, well, hope stays in the box because hope is the point, is the goal of your journey. Hope is the whole thing that you should be looking for and seeking in adventure. And you can never find it. You can never truly meet it. You can never truly possess it. And this contradiction there of the same type of contradiction he finds in love, which is love and hope are things that we seek and things that we want, but things that we can never truly have, is this kind of esoteric part, you could say, of the Agamben system. This astrological esoteric, have and not have, seek to possess and seek not to possess, kind of this contradictory, slightly mumbo-jumbo-y, but, kind of fun too, way he ends his book. When I was studying judo, one of the sensei said judo is just like the classic rock song. Hang on loosely and don't let go. If you cling too tightly, you're gonna lose control. Ooh. Thanks for joining me, guys. And see you next episode.